The sun hung low over the western hills, bleeding orange across the dry Texas sky. Dust floated lazily in the air, coating the brittle grass and splintered fences of the Callaway ranch in a soft haze. Wind moved like a whisper, brushing past the empty porch and the chipped rocking chair that hadn't creaked in weeks. It was the quiet that struck first, like the hush before a funeral bell. Jacob Callaway stood alone in the field, a scythe in his calloused hands. His frame was lean from years of hard living, and the lines carved into his face told a story older than his 41 years. His hat shadowed deep-set eyes that once burned with fire but now settled into the stillness of sorrow. 5 years had passed since death stole his wife in a winter too cruel to remember. Since then, Jacob had spoken little, smiled less, and poured every ounce of himself into raising their 2 daughters. Mary, 17 and bold as a sunrise, kept the house running with a fierce will inherited from her mother. She moved through chores like a woman grown, often with Lucy tagging close behind. Lucy, just 14, was softer spoken, all eyes and observation. She had a way of knowing things before they were said. Together, they had made the ranch more than livable. They'd made it home. It was a fragile piece, held together by love and the kind of stubbornness only frontier families knew. That morning had begun like any other. Mary was mending a saddle strap by the window. Lucy had wandered off to pick wild onions near the creek. Jacob had been cutting ryegrass for the mule. There was no omen in the sky, no change in the wind to mark the moment their world would be turned inside out. They came fast, 5 riders in long coats and dust-caked boots, bearing the kind of certainty that comes from knowing the law won't follow. The lead man, a grizzled outlaw named Thorne Garner, held a leather folio high as he dismounted. "Jacob Callaway," he said, voice flat, eyes colder than river stones. "You've got debts unpaid and time run out. This land and everything on it now belongs to the court of Abilene." Jacob's hand tightened on the scythe, but he said nothing. A younger man stepped forward, Silas Garner, the baby brother, all sharp edges and crooked smirks. "Judge signed it himself," he drawled, flicking the folio open like a showman. "Debts written plain. Back taxes. Loan default. Late ledger entries. Legal as scripture." Jacob looked to Mary, whose hands had stopped moving. Her eyes, like her mother's, held fear behind fury. "This land's been paid for 10 times over in blood and sweat," Jacob said finally. "Not on paper." Silas grinned. "And paper's what matters." The third man, broad, silent, moved toward the porch. Mary stepped between him and the door, shoulders squared. He raised a brow. "She's got spirit," Silas mused. "Reckon that's worth something." Jacob took a step forward, but the 4th rider, perched near the fence, leveled a rifle across the post. "You so much as twitch, old man, and she learns what real quiet is." Thorne Garner dropped the folio onto the dirt. "Take the girls," he said. "We'll leave the rest to the fire." It happened fast. Lucy was dragged screaming from the trees, arms flailing as one of the men bound her hands. Mary fought harder, kicked and bit, and nearly got loose until Silas struck her across the face with the back of his pistol. Jacob lunged, scythe raised, but the rifle cracked, and pain lit up his side like lightning. He fell hard, blood soaking into the dry soil. Flames licked the porch by the time Jacob dragged himself across the ground. Smoke curled into the sky. The outlaws rode off with his daughters bound over the saddles like sacks of grain. The fire devoured the house with greedy fingers. The rocking chair fell with a groan, tipping into the ash. Jacob lay in the dirt long after the sun had fled behind the hills. He did not cry. He did not curse. He simply breathed, shallow and ragged, staring up at a sky now heavy with stars that refused to offer comfort. When dawn came, the ranch was black and broken. What hadn't burned had been taken. The mule had fled. The well had been smashed. All that remained was a pile of ash and the bones of a life no longer worth naming. It was the silence that followed which stung the worst. Not the pain, not the loss, but the knowledge that somewhere, not far off, his daughters were being paraded through lawless hands as chattel. And no one, not the sheriff, not the town, not the church elders, would lift a finger to stop it. As the sun rose again, washing the wreckage in gold. Jacob crawled to the place beneath the hearthstones, where the wood had once been warm with firelight and laughter. He pulled at the stones with bloodied fingers, prying them loose one by one. There in the earth, hidden deep and wrapped in oilskin, lay the past he had buried. He did not open it. Not yet. Instead, he stared down at it for a long time, as though the weight of what he must become again pressed harder than any bullet wound. The wind picked up, whispering through the dead grass. And for the first time in years, Jacob Callaway spoke aloud, not a prayer, but a promise. "I'll find you girls. I swear it on her grave and my own." The silence didn't answer, but something in the air had changed. The wind was dry and sharp as Jacob Callaway limped across the barren flats, each step grinding pain into the fresh wound stitched by his own shaking hands. Blood had dried in a crust along his ribs, but he moved with the slow fury of a man too used to pain to be slowed by it. Behind him, the skeleton of the ranch smoked against the horizon. Ahead, the world opened into the wild, the kind of land where men disappeared and justice didn't ride with a badge. 3 days passed before he reached the hills near Fox Hollow, a place older than any town and twice as forgotten. A lean figure waited there beneath the shade of a cedar tree, arms folded, eyes watching the trail like they'd known he'd come. "You're late," she said, her voice as dry as the soil. Jacob slumped beside the tree. "I was shot." Noko, half-Comanche healer and knife mender, regarded him without sympathy. Her eyes had the depth of old stones, and the world had taught her not to blink at broken men. She cleaned his wound in silence, pouring whiskey until Jacob nearly passed out. When the bleeding stopped and the sky darkened, she finally spoke. "They took something." Jacob nodded. "My girls." "And now you'll go hunting," she said, tying off the dressing with a sharp pull. "You still know how." "I never forgot," he rasped. That night, under the hollow of stars, Jacob opened the oilskin bundle for the first time in 5 years. Inside were remnants of a different man. A pair of custom-forged throwing knives etched with silver veins, a heavy Colt revolver, a rusted Pinkerton badge with a split across the star, and a map inked in small, precise strokes, routes, names, outposts. On the back, a single phrase in his own hand: "Don't go back unless it matters." He folded it carefully and slid the badge into his coat. Tracking came back like instinct. The Garner boys weren't ghosts. They were arrogant, loud, and predictable. Jacob followed broken branches and cold ashes, cigarette butts and whiskey stench. They moved in a wide loop southward, dragging the girls with them through bunkhouses and river shacks, using them as bartering tokens in a world where women were currency and no one asked questions. He didn't rush. Rage would only get him killed. He moved like shadow, studying their stops, speaking only when necessary. A bartender in Borden choked out a name when Jacob pressed a blade to his gut. A wrangler near Big Elm found his saddle slashed and the word debt carved into the leather. Jacob wasn't a brute. He was deliberate. Men began to whisper, not just of a survivor, but of something darker. A hunter who left no trail but always knew yours. By the end of the second week, 2 of the Garner riders were dead. One found with his throat slit in a bathhouse. The other drowned in his own water trough, eyes wide with something more than fear. The third tried to flee, but Jacob cornered him in a canyon pass, made him dig a grave, and left him with a broken leg and a story to tell. The message was clear. Jacob Callaway was no longer a farmer. He was coming. Along the way, memories came like sparks from a fire. Images of his daughters laughing by the stream, Mary balancing a tin plate on her head to make Lucy giggle, the way they'd sung softly in the evenings to fill the hollow spaces their mother left behind. Jacob hadn't sung since she died, but now, as he rode toward vengeance, he hummed under his breath, low and cracked, as if the sound might tie him to something that wasn't rage. In the outskirts of a canyon town called Del Lobo, he found a man named Avery Pike, an old associate from a time Jacob had buried beneath years of soil and sweat. Avery ran a blacksmith shop now, and limped on one leg from a bullet Jacob once saved him from. "Wasn't sure you were still alive," Avery said, eyeing the badge tucked half visible in Jacob's coat. "Neither was I." They talked over tools and iron shavings, but it wasn't small talk. Jacob needed direction, and Avery provided it. Silas Garner was moving the girls toward Dead Man's Canyon, where the gang kept a stronghold inside the Redstone Caves. "I can't give you men," Avery said, handing over a bag of ammunition and a sawed-off shotgun. "But I can give you warning. Silas isn't just cruel. He's smart now. He's not the runt you remember." Jacob strapped the shotgun to his saddle. "Neither am I." Before he left, Avery pointed toward the town chapel. "You ought to say a prayer." Jacob looked toward the chapel bell tower, its paint long peeled by sun and silence. "I did once," he muttered. "Didn't take." The road to Dead Man's Canyon was no longer just dirt and trail. It was something deeper, etched in every footstep and blood-marked track Jacob left behind. The Garner boys had taken his daughters, but what they truly stole was the life he'd tried to build from nothing. A man like Jacob didn't forget how to hunt. He just forgot why. Now he remembered. The wind picked up again, hot and heavy with grit. The desert stretched before him like an open grave. Jacob Callaway rode into it without looking back. Red rock rose like the ribs of some ancient beast, jagged and high against a bleak sky as Jacob Callaway entered Dead Man's Canyon. The light had gone strange here, amber and dim, as though the sun feared to shine fully in a place soaked with old violence. His horse snorted at the canyon's mouth, nostrils flaring. Animals could sense what men often chose to ignore. Jacob dismounted and led the mare to a patch of thornbrush, tying her low and tight. The canyon narrowed ahead, choked with shadows and silence. Somewhere beyond the bends and broken trails, his daughters waited in the grip of the Garner gang, one breath away from being sold, used, or lost forever. He moved on foot now, each step careful, slow, steady. He had studied the maps Avery Pye gave him, and the layout was burned into his skull. 3 paths forked through the canyon, all of them leading to the same high hollow, where the Garners holed up in an old mining depot built into the stone itself. They turned it into a fortress, half buried and surrounded by high ground. The only way in without being seen was through an abandoned shaft that Jacob had once sealed himself during his brief stint surveying the mine back in '71. That irony didn't amuse him. Nothing did anymore. As he climbed, his fingers found old grooves in the rock, places his own hands had cut decades earlier. Time had filled the shaft with dust and bat droppings, but the tunnel held. Jacob crawled through without sound, teeth clenched tight against the sharp sting of reopened stitches along his ribs. The world narrowed to breath and grit, until the stone gave way to firelight. He reached the upper gallery unnoticed, eyes adjusting to the glow of lanterns strung along the depot's ceiling. Below, half a dozen outlaws lounged near crates and stacked rifles, playing cards or gnawing on old jerky. A few tossed dice. One leaned against the far wall, cleaning his boots with the same knife he'd once held to Lucy's throat. Jacob saw him and didn't blink. To the right, in a cage made of rusted iron bars and repurposed gate hinges, Mary sat with Lucy huddled against her. Both girls looked thinner, bruised, but breathing. Mary's eyes were still defiant. Lucy's were haunted, yet sharp. When Mary looked up, something in her twitched. She didn't see Jacob, not yet, but some instinct rose in her spine like a spark. One floor above the depot, in a room carved from the canyon wall itself, Silas Garner paced with a bottle in one hand and a whip coiled in the other. He'd grown harder since Jacob last saw him, clean-shaven now, leaner, with a predator's gait. His eyes glinted with the casual madness of a man too long unchallenged. He wasn't drunk. He drank like a man who knew what came next and liked it. A young boy came to the door, barely old enough to shave. "Boss," he said, "Thorne sent word. Says the ranch was a full burn. The old man's dead." Silas chuckled and poured himself another drink. "Then the ghosts are gone, and we're rich tomorrow." Jacob exhaled. Slow, cold, controlled. He counted the steps down from the gallery to the depot floor, 12. There were 3 guards with pistols on the left, 2 shotguns on the right, and 1 man fiddling with the repeater near the center. 12 steps. 6 targets. No time for noise. He moved like a shadow falling. The first blade struck the man at the repeater clean through the throat. No scream. Just a wet gurgle and collapse. The second dropped before he could rise from the crate, the knife sinking between ribs. By the third, one man shouted, a single syllable cut short by the crack of Jacob's Colt. The shot echoed like thunder, scattering cards and men alike. The depot became chaos. Mary screamed. Lucy ducked low, covering her ears. Jacob surged forward, the old Pinkerton instincts taking over. He fired twice more. One chest shot, one kneecap, then dove behind a crate as a shotgun roared and splintered the wood beside him. He rolled, came up on one knee, and shot the man reloading mid-motion. The outlaw fell back, head snapping like a doll's. From above, Silas's voice rang out. Who the hell? He saw Jacob then, and for the first time, Silas Garner paled. Jacob raised the Colt. Hello, boy. Silas ducked back into the stairwell, barking orders. Two more men charged in from a side tunnel, rifles ready. Jacob hurled his second blade. It buried in the gut of one. The other raised his gun, but Mary, bless her blood, had reached through the bars and yanked the man's belt, pulling him off balance. He swung at her wildly, but Jacob was already there, snapping the man's neck with one brutal twist. The key hung from his belt. Jacob grabbed it, opened the cage. Mary stepped out like a fury unleashed. Lucy clung to her, eyes wide. Get out the way we came, Jacob said. The shaft's clear. Follow the trail west to the cedar. There's a horse. Ride. But Mary started. I'll finish this. She hesitated, her jaw trembling with all the words she wouldn't say, then nodded. She took Lucy's hand. Come on. They vanished into the tunnel. Jacob turned just as Silas reappeared at the stairwell, this time with Thorne Garner beside him. Jacob's face hardened. I thought I killed you. Thorne raised a rifle, but Jacob fired first. The bullet struck his shoulder and spun him against the wall. Silas roared and rushed Jacob, tackling him hard. They crashed into crates, both men grunting and swinging wild. Silas fought like a cornered dog, no grace, just fury. But Jacob fought with purpose. Every blow was calculated. Every movement spoke of hard years, lost love, and the bitter fire of a man who no longer feared death. Silas landed a punch to Jacob's wounded side. Jacob gasped, staggered. You're too old, Callaway. Silas sneered. And you're still just a coward in a man's coat. He headbutted Silas, then drove the revolver barrel under his chin. Silas froze. Jacob's finger tightened, but he didn't fire. He stared into Silas's eyes, saw the fear, the kind Jacob used to carry like a stone in his chest. No, Jacob whispered. You don't get an easy out. He struck him hard across the jaw with the pistol grip. Silas dropped unconscious. Jacob turned as Thorne crawled toward his rifle. One shot finished him. That death he'd earned clean. Smoke hung heavy in the depot now. Lanterns flickered. Somewhere beyond, he heard hoofbeats. Mary and Lucy, gone west. Jacob holstered the Colt, exhaled through cracked lips. He stood alone among the bodies, blood pooling across the stone floor. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon like it remembered every scream ever uttered here. Jacob didn't speak. He just walked. There was one thing left to do. By the time Jacob Callaway emerged from Dead Man's Canyon, the sun had dipped low, casting the sky in streaks of copper and crimson. Smoke curled faintly from behind him, thin as a memory, rising into a sky that had seen too much. His clothes were torn, soaked with blood, some of it his, most of it not. He didn't look back. The canyon could keep its ghosts. The trail west ran narrow through the chaparral, and his ribs ached with every step. He walked slow, steady, his revolver low on his hip and his shadow long across the dust. The horse was gone. Mary had taken it, as she should have. He wasn't sure where they were by now, how far the girls had ridden, but he knew they were safe. That was enough. An hour later, he reached the cedar tree. Beneath it, the earth was disturbed, hoofprints, boot tracks, and something else, a bundle wrapped in cloth. He knelt beside it and unwrapped the oilskin slowly. Inside was the Pinkerton badge, cleaned, shined. Mary's handwriting, scrawled in charcoal on a torn scrap of canvas. We'll be waiting in Fox Hollow. Come home. He closed his eyes, breathing it in. The wind whispered through the branches. carrying the scent of horses and sagebrush and distant rain. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried. The world kept turning. But Jacob wasn't done. That night, he rode into Dry Wells on a borrowed horse with a saddle too stiff and a gait too slow, dragging behind him the bound, bloodied figure of Silas Garner. The outlaw was gagged and twitching, barely conscious from the blow to the skull Jacob had delivered hours earlier. Every man in town turned to stare as the old farmer-turned-hunter came down the main road like death in boots. He tied Silas to the post outside the sheriff's office and walked inside without knocking. Sheriff Barnes looked up from his desk, a tin cup of coffee halfway to his lips. "Callaway," he said, surprise flickering across his face. "Heard you were dead." Jacob dropped a satchel on the floor. Inside were maps, names, sketches, every detail of the Garner gang's routes, hideouts, deals. Evidence Jacob had gathered and never planned to use. Until now. "I want a trial," Jacob said flatly. "Public. For every man, woman, and child to see." Barnes squinted. "And what if the law lets him off easy? You know how this works." Jacob leaned in, his voice low and cold. "If the law fails, I won't." The sheriff held his gaze for a long, tense moment, then nodded. "All right." They held the trial the next morning. The town square filled with people, ranchers, traders, barkeeps, mothers with children clutched close. Mary and Lucy were there too, wrapped in blankets, standing at the edge of the crowd. Mary's chin was high. Lucy clutched her hand. Silas Garner stood shackled, bruised, defiant. But the crowd listened as Jacob testified, voice steady and unsparing. He told of the fire, the theft, the trail of blood. He listed names of the dead, the kidnapped, the ruined. Others stepped forward, those who'd been robbed, whose sisters or daughters had disappeared near Garner's routes. The judge listened in silence. The verdict was swift. Guilty. The sentence, hanging at dawn. Silas didn't beg. He just laughed once, sharp and bitter, like a man who knew the world had caught up to him too late. That night, Jacob sat outside the boarding house where Mary and Lucy were resting. The stars blinked overhead like forgotten gods. He held the badge in his hand, thumb rubbing across the grooves. The fire that had driven him here, rage, grief, justice. It burned low now, smoldering in the pit of his chest. He wasn't sure what would fill that space once it was gone. Footsteps approached. Mary. She sat beside him on the wooden steps, her face pale, eyes lined with things no girl should have seen. "You saved us," she said. He nodded, unable to speak. "I thought you'd never come back." "I wasn't sure I could," he said softly. "Not after what I became." Mary looked at him, then at the badge in his hand. "You became what you had to be." He swallowed hard. "I wanted you to grow up believing there was peace, that you didn't have to carry what I carried." "You gave us that for as long as you could," she whispered. "And when it was gone, you fought for it again. I'll remember that." A tear slid down his cheek. He wiped it away roughly. In the morning, the rope stretched taut, and the crowd fell silent. Silas Garner met his end without ceremony. Justice came not as vengeance, but as reckoning. Jacob didn't watch. Instead, he stood beside his daughters as the gallows creaked behind them, the sky turning gold with sunrise. The nightmare had ended, but the land was still wild, the frontier still cruel, and peace would always be something a man had to earn every single day. They left Dry Wells together that afternoon, riding east through the canyon flats. Mary had packed light. Lucy carried a small wooden bird Jacob had carved her years ago. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. By nightfall, the fire burned low near a quiet stream, and Jacob stared into it, the badge resting beside his bedroll. He didn't know if he'd return to the fields, or if the violence would come for him again one day. But he had something now that Silas never would. He had family. He had fire that didn't just destroy. It warmed. It lit the way home. And so the man, once broken by loss, became something else. Not a legend. Not a ghost. Just a father who rode through hell and brought his daughters back.